Call the James City County Wetlands Board to order. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to preserve the wetlands and to accommodate economic activities so as to prevent desolation. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Rodley?
Here.
Mr. Waltrip?
Here.
Mr. Gussman?
Here.
Mr. Hughes?
Here.
Mr. Dunn?
Here.
And Mr. Dunn is here for Mr. Apperson.
Everybody seen the minutes from last month? Any problems?
Nope.
Minutes stand as prepared. I'm going to open public hearing. WJPA 190034 and Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I want to make you aware and the public aware that this case has been officially withdrawn in writing today.
Thank you.
And there'll be no need for a vote to occur on this case.
I understand that we've got a couple of citizens who've traveled quite a ways and would like to speak on this matter, and so please come forth.
You have to open.
I think we opened, didn't we open it? It was,
Oh, okay.
Good evening. My name is Linda Henderson Gordon, and I own 35 plus or minus AFD acres at 2000 Bushneck Road, adjoining the property in question. It appears the languid, beautiful, unspoiled lower Chickahominy River needs to be defended and befriended yet again. Recently, I took a refresher course on the internet and saw numerous people exploring the delights of the Chickahominy. There were fishing tournaments, kayakers, naturalists, Native American tribes, historians, and even a song by Jed Morum on his Miles from Home CD entitled Chickahominy River. The addition of the river park at Barrett's Ferry has introduced countless visitors and locals to her delights. I was befuddled upon notification that the exact same issue on the exact same property on the exact same shoreline has been resurrected again for consideration. I am here tonight to offer my exact same objections, plus well-researched additions to my prior objections recorded by letter in 2012, a copy of which I will again submit in addition to my comments tonight. In 2012, James City County rightly rejected the application for wetland destruction and installation of sterile hardscaping on 105 feet of shoreline at 2035 Bushneck Road. The property in question, like my own, has a naturally occurring protective buffer of marsh, wetlands, and wooded shoreline populated with pickerel weed, arum, narrowleaf spatterdock, a smattering of wild rice, possibly still there, and ball cypress trees. There is a significant colony of essential submerged aquatic vegetation, SAVs, confirmed by aerial surveys as early as 1978, by my husband, by the way, when he worked at VIMS, and again recently by VIMS, including coontail, common naiad, eelgrass, hydrilla, etc. SAVs are important indicators of health for a body of water. They provide habitat and protection for juvenile fish, as well as food for migratory waterfowl. Buzzards Bay is a shallow pocket in the lower Chickahominy. The area in question experiences little tidal disturbance or influence. My property shoreline remains virtually unchanged, having been in my family for well over 75 years. Ms. Clark was offered an alternative living shoreline solution to her perceived problem in 2012. A core log installation was suggested, an installation leaving no destruction of wetlands. My research indicates that in such an installation, the life expectancy of the core logs alone is 2 to 5 years. It has been 7 years since the installation, so the owner of 2035 Bushneck Road has gotten above and beyond the life expectancy from her installation. Had the core logs been properly anchored to the bank and planted, one would expect native shrubbery to have penetrated and rooted into them, securing them while the core slowly disintegrated, forming an integral part of the natural embankment. The owner has yet again, for the second time, applied for a permit to place a rock revetment on a revised, now 110 feet, an additional 5 feet, of bank along the pristine Chickahominy River. My research confirms that revetments require destructive, manual manipulation of the marsh to create a slope carved into the shoreline to accept the hardscaping. Significant clearing of even mature riparian vegetation, sometimes even trees, to provide access for equipment destroys existing habitat and instead creates a sterile, hardened, unnatural scour between uplands and wetlands. Sediment transport is also a significant issue during installation and possibly after. The natural absorption of runoff from uplands by the natural embankment would be nullified. The entire armoring activity would negatively impact adjoining properties and the river. We must remember that the wetlands and waterways belong to the people of the Commonwealth of Virginia, not to individual landowners. I have to question why anyone would want to do this, and at great expense besides. It's worth reiterating that the area in question is shallow for quite a distance from the shore. The bottom consists of deep organic muck, providing valuable habitat for countless biological organisms. It is deep and dark. How well I remember fishing with my mama when the tide left us stranded yards from the dock. It was my job to get out, sink into the mud, and pull our small rowboat in. I sank in that mud up to my knees. Buzzards Bay is shallow and silted. There is no natural wave disturbance of significance, and what does occur can reach equilibrium by recovering on its own. Remember, nature always wins. If the owner of the property in question still feels they must do something, please recommend assistance from Dr. Carl Hirschner, the Living Shoreline Specialist at VIMS in Gloucester Point, or Pam Mason at the same institution, or encourage them to investigate or consult with the Virginia Coastal Program. Recommended shrubbery installation for a situation like this includes selections such as wax myrtle, American elderberry, southern arrowwood, buttonbush, groundsel or high-tide bush, nannyberry, and viburnum. In planting these, you can feed the birds as well as stabilize a bank. And if you feel you must manipulate the bank, try brush mattresses, limbed portions of small cedar trees, tree logs, root wad revetments, woody vegetation plantings, or you can always plant more trees like bald cypress. Why would anyone find it necessary to invest so much in something so potentially ineffective, costly, and environmentally damaging, and from my perspective, right down ugly? Is it that revetments create space behind them that must be filled and can add to property dimensions? Some may be wondering why I'm so worked up over 110 feet of shoreline. This project, if granted, would set a destructive precedent, one everyone will regret. This, if granted, is a first fatal strike to the last remaining unsullied section of the Chickahominy. Others will no doubt demand the same destructive solution with accompanying unintentional consequences. If this application is granted, the natural beauty of the lower Chickahominy will be lost. And as for those so-called exchanges, where you destroy one piece of property and pay some money to restore damage on another unassociated piece of property, let me remind you, these wetlands, the wetlands in question, haven't been destroyed thus far and don't need to be restored. The natural, unadulterated shoreline of this area is beautiful and functional as it stands. There is no compensation or exchange that will satisfy lovers of the Chickahominy. If damage is allowed to her wetlands, changing her face forever, no good deed in another area will dampen our sorrow and righteous indignation. There is no amount of money that can compensate for intentional, permitted damage to our treasured river's embankment, wetlands, or the river itself. I'm here tonight praying you'll save what remains of my generational home, James City, the mother county, as I knew and loved her, by saving the Chickahominy. Remember, none of us really owns our property. All we really have is stewardship, and we pay taxes during our lifetimes, and then it belongs to others. We go, it remains. A trip to the courthouse to search land records will soberly confirm my point. Some things are too precious to lose, and I hope you, like me, feel the Chickahominy River in her natural state is one of these. Just say no to revetment on her shores in this case and in any other cases that may come before you. Yes, you can help save the Chickahominy by your response to this application before you tonight. The Chickahominy belongs to the people of the Commonwealth. Let us strive to pass her along to the generations that follow as the meandering, pristine river we have known and loved. Please deny this permit as you did in 2012. Say no. Save the Chickahominy. I and generations to follow will remember and thank you. And I thank you tonight for the opportunity given me to present my thoughts, my plea on preserving the Chickahominy. Thank you.
Thank you. You indicated you had a presentation, physical one that you wanted to present us.
I have pictures and things.
If you'd like to give them to Mr. Wilson.
All right, and I have copies of this presentation and also the letter I sent to the Virginia Marine Resources Commission in 2012 for you to keep. I can get those when you
Thank you.
hand them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would anybody else care to speak to this matter? If not, we're going to close the public hearing. Do we have any board considerations tonight? Hearing none. Matters of special privilege? None. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We are adjourned.
I'd like to call to order the October 9th, 2019 meeting of the James City County Chesapeake Bay Board. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to protect against and minimize pollution and deposition of sediments in wetlands, streams, and lakes in James City County, which are tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay. May we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Roadley?
Here.
Mr. Waltrip?
Here.
Mr. Gussman?
Here.
Mr. Hughes?
Here.
Mr. Dunn?
Here.
And Mr. Dunn is here for Mr. Apperson.
First order of business are the minutes from the September 11th meeting. Any problems with the minutes?
No, sir.
Minutes stand as approved. Our next order of business are public hearings. Our first public hearing is CBPA 19-0104 for 500 Thompson Lane. Mr. Wilson?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mike Wilson, Senior Watershed Planner, here to present case CBE 19-0104, 500 Thompson Lane. Mr. Ross Thompson, the applicant, and they wish to construct an additional addition to their tack room, which was approved by the board last year, and then in addition to that, also a solar array. Property located to the west of Centerville Road, off of Thompson Lane. It is also in the Gordon Creek watershed. A closer picture of the aerial photo. There is an existing embankment here. This body of water is known as Warburton's Pond. This house and garage were approved to be removed and rebuilt last year by the board. The barn and tack room here, the board had approved an addition to that for the Thompsons to live in temporarily while this part of the property is under renovation. My understanding, and Mr. Thompson can correct me if I'm wrong during the public hearing, but my understanding is that in their final design of the tack room addition, the mechanical equipment, there was not enough room for the mechanical equipment, so they're requesting an additional 112 feet to house the mechanical equipment for that addition. In addition to that, there's a solar array proposed in the back of the property back here. The floodplain for the property is elevation shown in blue here, and then the Warburton's Pond also has a floodplain associated with it that does not affect any of their proposal here. I'll talk about the floodplain issue here in a little bit. It does not affect the tack room addition at all, but it would affect the solar array. Topography of the site, house is on the high ground. The property does slope down. It gets flatter back here towards the back of the property. The RPA, as it affects this property, There is a donut hole that is not RPA right here, and that is due to the fact that this property has wetlands and perennial features on 3/4 of the property. From the site plan that Mr. Thompson submitted, the solar array is located here. It is 116 feet long by 11.5 feet wide. It will be elevated. It's a fixed structure, but it will be elevated above the ground to an elevation of at least 9 for any electrical flood proofing. They will need to get and to follow building permit and safety conditions for the solar array as well. The back room addition is going to be approximately this location here. So a couple site photographs. The proposed solar array is in the mowed part of the yard. That yard has been mowed historically back before the Thompsons bought the property. Another view of the solar array location. And a third view. And the tack room addition is approximately here. And staff does concur with their request, and should the board wish to approve, we do recommend these conditions: that the applicant obtain any other local, federal, state permits as necessary, that the plantings will require 2 additional planting units, that the exception request become null and void if construction is not begun in 1 year from tonight, October 9, 2020, and that written request for an extension shall be submitted to our office no later than August 28, 2020. And I do want to digress just a minute to have a little further discussion on the mitigation requirements. The solar array is at an angle to pick up the southern sun. The entire footprint of the solar array is somewhere around 1,400 square feet, which normally would require 4 planting units. Because it's elevated up so high, there's grass that will be growing under it, and the fact that it does collect and concentrate some stormwater. Came to a compromise that the mitigation should be cut in half for the solar array. While the solar array is impervious, it's not truly impervious like a true rooftop. So I did want to bring that to the board's attention. That's why the mitigation is 2 planting units instead of 4. In addition, they have already paid a surety for the original Chesapeake Bay exception that was granted. This would fall under that surety requirement, thus no additional sureties are required. Be happy to answer any questions the board may have on this.
I didn't quite follow. You have the solar array, but I mean, is the whole thing paved underneath, or is it just like a pad on either end, or how much how much impervious surface is underneath the solar array?
Excellent question. It's on piles, so there's no pavement, there's no gravel under the array. It'll be dirt and grass. It'll be suspended up on piles that are screwed into the ground. So that's the structure of it. So certainly if there was gravel proposed under it or pavement, I would have a different feeling on the impervious nature of it. But
any other questions for the staff?
Seeing that it's really not affecting the stormwater much. Up probably 5 or 6 feet.
That's, Mr. Thompson made that exact discussion, had that exact discussion with me. Clearly, it's a board decision if there's going to be any mitigation required for it.
That's what
but-
I was thinking. It seems like to me the only thing you're gonna have is some piles that are gonna be driven or put in the yard to hold it. As far as, and strong as far as mitigation is concerned, really not gonna be anything detrimental as far as,
The discussion I had with Mr. Thompson was that the stormwater would still hit the array and sheet off, and potentially there
direction.
might be a little erosion where it's running off the array itself, but the majority of it, in
that was
his,
the concern, is that concentration of water on the angle hitting it at the base of it.
correct,
I
and
got you, okay.
Plus, there's additional encroachment up at the tech room.
yeah, so of 100, a little over 100 square feet additional there.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward? Please state your name, and if you have any statements for the board, we're good to hear them.
Yes, my name is Ross Thompson, and I and my wife are the owners of the property in question. And we were here before you last year to get the initial approval on redoing the house and also the addition onto the barn. So I'll talk about the barn first. The addition is a 24 feet long by 12 foot wide addition that you approved last year with the appropriate mitigation. When we got into the design, we discovered that there was no easy way to put the utilities, the water heater, the mechanical equipment, the air handler unit, et cetera, without squeezing it in closets or in unusual places. And so in August, I proposed and sent to Mr. Wilson and to the building permit section of the county an extra 6 feet on the 12 foot wide, but 24, so now it's 30 feet by 12 feet. And all of the mechanical equipment will sit in that room, and just makes it a heck of a lot easier from a design perspective. And that 6 by 12 is 72 square feet, but then you've got to put a door into it and then a steps and a deck, so that's where you get to the 112 square feet of additional space that's necessary in order to do the tack room. Subject to your discussion and approval tonight, we are finally within about a week of awarding the contract to one of the builders that's been proposing on this. It's just taken that long to get through all of the permitting and the final design. The solar array is exactly to the point of your question. There are no holes dug in the ground or no concrete footings. It's basically a big helical screw, and there's 32 of them. And the helical screw goes into the ground and anchors the metal bracing for the solar arrays. And the solar arrays will sit 5 feet above the ground because the lowest spot is 4 feet, and they need to be at least 9 feet above because of the 100-year floodplain restriction. So the solar arrays will be screwed into the ground. The grass will grow around where the screws are, so the screw goes into the ground just like a regular screw, and the pole comes straight up, and it holds the metal bracing, and it will hold what's proposed are 64 solar panels that will be perfectly south-facing and, capture the light of the sun. And then it's been designed to be enough power to power the entire property, and that was our thought when we proposed it. Questions?
Any questions for Mr. Thompson? Okay. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? At this time, I'll close the public hearing. Discussion from the board.
I don't have any problem with it.
Chairman,
I think it's our first solar array, and I can't see how that can possibly affect, the runoff or,
The property's already cleared. It's not like he has to go in and clear.
Yeah.
So it's ready to go.
okay. Would someone like to make a motion?
Yes, sir, I'll make a motion to adopt a resolution to grant the exception from Chesapeake Bay Board case number CBPA 190104 at 500 Thompson Lane.
Okay, can we have a roll call?
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip? Yes. Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Okay, it carries. Thank you for coming out this evening. Next case is CBPA 19-0092, 141 Westbury.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, watershed planner. I here present CBPA 19-0092, 141 Westbury. Mr. Mike Turkovich of Berkeley Design Group has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Scott and Ms. Wendy LeBolt for encroachments into the RPA buffer to construct a retaining wall. The property in question is located within the Fords Colony subdivision, and the aerial photograph above shows the approximate location of the retaining wall and the stormwater pond adjacent to the property. Parcel was platted in 1997 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Ordinance, after the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Ordinance, but prior to the 2004 changes. Above is a sanitary sewer line that does affect the property, and the topo indicating a slight drop off towards the pond from the front of the property towards the rear. And also the resource protection area as it affects this property. The house was granted administrative exception earlier this year. And the reason for the retaining wall being that the necessity for the retaining wall being that when the house was built, fill was brought in but wasn't leveled out or graded to an appropriate slope, causing a pretty drastic drop-off that you'll see in pictures. But the retaining wall being indicated here in yellow and the resource protection area in red. Mitigation that has been proposed for this project does exceed requirements. Total lot size of this property is 0.62 acres, of which 73% is located within the RPA. The total square footage of the retaining wall is 130 square feet, typically requiring one planting unit. There are some existing plants in the rear of the property. However, the applicant has proposed to revegetate behind the retaining wall. Site photographs of the approximate location of the retaining wall coming behind here. This is the slope in question that the retaining wall will then be mitigating for. There's some erosion occurring behind the plants, and also the safety of accessing the rear of the property is the reason for the retaining wall and the steps. Staff does concur with this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve, the staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all of the necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. That a surety of $250 be paid in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to ensure the mitigation requirement. And this exception request approval become null and void if construction is not begun by October 9th, 2020, with written request for an extension submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division of James City County no later than August 28th, 2020, 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have at this time.
Sir, I have one. Can you go back to the picture showing where the retaining wall is going to be? I think it was the last picture you showed, right there. When they built the house, could they have carried the grade out further and to taper it down, or did they have to stop at this location? Could the yard have been bigger, or?
I'll allow Mike Wilson to answer that question.
Mr. Hughes, when they built the house, the silt fence location was, and the limits that were approved were here. Certainly, they could have graded the yard. The builder could have graded the yard differently to lessen its slope. While I don't know exactly what happened, my guess is they had the dirt on site from the foundation, and they just used it as necessary, and then just abruptly graded down to where the silt fence was, and called that a day.
But they couldn't go past where the silt fence was.
It could not.
Thank you.
There's a couple reasons for that. A, it would encroach too far into the seaward RPA, the seaward 50-foot RPA. Plus, there's a sanitary sewer easement the Service Authority owns back there.
What, did I understand you correctly that the proposed alignment of the retaining wall is within an area that we approved for disturbance previously?
Correct. That approval was administrative approval. Just want to be clear.
Any other questions for the staff? At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would anyone like to speak on this issue? Okay, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board?
I think it would be an improvement over what they have now. We wouldn't have the possibility of runoff, and there's going to be runoff as long as the thing's there. And you have to fertilizer runoff also. So I think this is an improvement over what we have. I have no problem.
Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA TAC 19 TAC 0092 at 141 Westbury.
Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries and the exception is granted. Our next case is CBPA 19-0095 for 141 Macaulay Road. Mr. Wilson?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, the applicant has submitted a written request for deferral to the November Chesapeake Bay Board meeting. Staff concurs with that request, with the stipulation that the public hearing be opened as it was public noticed, and then kept open until the November meeting. Are there any questions?
Okay, at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing for CBPA 19-0095. Is there anyone present who would like to speak on this issue? Okay, the public hearing will remain open through our next board meeting. Do we have to vote on deferral, or?
No, you can just do a voice vote if you'd like. All in favor?
All those in favor of deferring this signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Motion carries. The case remains deferred till our November meeting. That concludes our public hearings. We have one board consideration, CBPA 18-0123, 102 Walton Heath.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mr. Martin Mather is requesting a one-year extension to the previously granted exception request at 102 Walton Heath. He thought he had a buyer for the property and had not pursued building on it, and his plans have changed. He now plans to build a house that the board approved, and he's asking for that one-year extension to get his plans approved through the county and start that process. Staff concurs with that request, and all the previous conditions remain the same except for the expiration date shall change to December 2020.
Any questions for staff? We don't have a public hearing, right?
Correct.
Okay, can we have a motion to grant this extension?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the extension for an exception to the Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 18-0123 at 102 Walton Heath.
Let's see. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Rodley?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Hey, motion carries. We do not have any matters of special privilege tonight. Can I have a motion to adjourn? So moved. We are now adjourned.